Hi, today I want to show you how I've been working on finishing all of my hoops to make them look super professional, as well as making them super tight so when I take them to shows and people touch them, that it still retains the nice bounce and fabric tautness, which makes it look really nice. So this is my fiddlehead kit, which has some really fun beading on it. And this is the way I have been finishing them. In my kits, I explain that you can simply do a running stitch around the extra fabric and pull it tight in the back. And that's totally fine because you're not going to see it from the front. And if you're going to pop it out or do something else, there's no need to do this level of finish. But if you want to have this nice finished look, it hides all of the threads, I guess, in the back. But what I did here is a blanket stitch, and you can see that it starts to get a little bit wonky once I get to like the second half of the pattern. So you can tell I started here and then I worked my way around, and once it gets to be about right here is when I'm really pulling tight on that thread and that felt to make sure that I get a really tight finish. And you can see pretty up close here how tight I'm pulling with that embroidery floss and the felt to make the front of it really secure. This is so secure that I can undo the hoop, or I should say the outer hoop, because this is all tied on the inner hoop and nothing happens to it. That's how tight it is. And that's what I need, just because these go through a lot of wear and tear that your project certainly would not go through. So I'm going to pop that back on here. So you could tell that it's not the prettiest, especially when I start to really need to pull tight to make the fabric tight. You could see with the blanket stitch, that's the kind of outer part of the blanket stitch around the border, and then you have these kind of legs that go inwards at regular intervals towards the center. What I have done instead this is my landscape number 2 pattern, is I've started using a different needle and then just a slightly different stitch to achieve what I need to on the back. And I feel like it's easier on my hands and has a nicer finish, a little bit less finicky on the tension. You can still tell that like I did this right side first, and then when I get roughly halfway, you could see where I'm really trying to pull. But again, I'm trying to make it so tight just because of traveling with these so much, but you perhaps would not pull as tight as I have here and avoid that puckering. This over here is just normal tension, you know, threading through and not pulling super tight, and you have that nice look. So I've tried looking up what this stitch might be called, and I can't find a name at the moment. So if you happen to know what it is, please let me know. But I'm going to show you my strategy on how I do this one. To do this stitch, I've actually been experimenting with these curved quilting needles. These are from John James. It says assorted sizing. You could tell that there's 2, this is the one I'm using. There's 2 sizes, a little bit smaller loop and a little bit larger loop. From what I can tell, there's not any difference in kind of the diameter or circumference of the needle itself. So I think that the sizing is purely just how large the loops are and how fine an area you want to work in. Curved needles for quilting, it talks about how you know, you could use them for box picking or upholstery or whatnot, but I really like these for the reasons that I'll show you in just one sec. So when you're finishing your embroidery, you've got your your two hoops, right? You've got your outer hoop and then your inner hoop, and the inner hoop is what the fabric is stretched super tight onto and what you're trying to achieve. So when you're getting close to that edge, you might have a hard time using a straight needle and getting around that wood. So what I've found is that this curved needle, this curved quilting needle, does a really nice job of grabbing it super close, grabbing the fabric super close and over where the wood is behind. If you think about, if I've got these two things next to each other, you can see that there's the wood behind, and then here is where I have fabric that I'm trying to pull tight. So the curved needle has a nice way of just grabbing what I need and coming instantly up, versus a flat needle or a regular embroidery needle. And when I put it in where I need to, you could see that the tip of the needle is behind all my layers, and it's much harder to work with. I use just a multi-pack of felt that I got on Amazon. I'll put a link in the comments. It's somewhat thinner. You can kind of see some light coming through. It's a little bit denser in other parts than not, which really has not been an issue for me, especially for finishing the back of these. However, and you can perhaps even pick up a little bit on that. Like it's a little bit thinner here and a little bit thicker over here. But you might really, I think any felt could work. Anything that has a little bit of give, but not too much give. Because if it has too much give or a looser weave, then when you're pulling tight, you're going to end up just destroying the fabric on the back of it. So the felt is a nice option. And when I am ready to finish the back, all I do is take an extra hoop that I have, and I trace the inside hoop with a pen onto the felt itself. I cut it out, and then the piece that I have facing the outside is obviously the piece without the pen on it. So once you do that and cut it out, you're going to take your curved needle and your embroidery floss. I've used all 6 strands here, and you're basically just doing straight stitches where you're kind of crossing behind, and then so your needle goes up here, up through the fabric, it'll go down. So behind the fabric, it's crossing this way, but then in front, you just see the straight parts going around the outside of the hoop. I get a little bit better down here. I ended up doing a couple extra stitches in a couple of these spots where I felt like I needed a little bit of reinforcement, like especially up here and over at the end, where I kind of just overlapped some of them a little bit to give a little extra reinforcement. So this is actually the first one that I've done with this style, so I'm hoping that I get better. This is a little bit hard for me, but anyways, I take the quilting needle and I'm just making these evenly spaced connections all the way around. Now, like I said at the beginning, I'm not pulling at all here. All I'm doing is making sure that there's no extra thread, that I'm not puckering the felt at all if I can avoid it, and perhaps I'm using a little bit shorter stitches from roughly like where the stitch comes in to the edge of the felt itself. And I'm leaving myself a little extra fabric over here that I'm using to pull. So I don't want to have kind of overstay my welcome on this side and eat up too much of the felt when I lay it down, and then be left with very little on this side to kind of pull tight. That might not make sense until you're doing it, but certainly experiment with it. Again, it's the back of your embroidery, so it matters, but also give yourself some grace. So I'm not pulling at all really over here, except to keep the stitches, lying flat. And you could tell when I start to pull, you could tell that I'm really pulling this fabric as tight as I can with the stitches, and you could see it's pulling on the felt, it's pulling on the fabric, and then it obviously has not as even a tension as the rest of the piece. Again, my purpose is to have this be able to pop off the hoop super easy, because these take a lot of wear and tear when I am at shows. And then to finish the thread, I knot it and then hide the tail behind, kind of just doing that. I'm sure it has a name, but doing the strategy where basically you bring it up, pretending that that needle is the thread. You clip it right here, and then it eventually kind of falls behind a little bit so you don't see that tail at all. Let me know what you think about my technique in the comments, or if you have any names for what I've been working on. But I found that this gives me a really great finish that is durable and holds up to all the traveling that my pieces do, and then gives a really nice finish too. If you were to hang this on the wall, you can see that there's a nice low profile there, and it looks really nice. Enjoy. Thanks for being here.